So is Tet really this good? Well, according to those guys it is. But here's the thing. I don't know. I've never celebrated it. You see, in the 15 years that I've been living here in Vietnam, not one local has ever invited me to celebrate Tet with their families at home. So I've never really experienced a true Tet, if you know what I mean. And all this, despite my many efforts over the years to make friends, learn the culture, and speak the language. So I guess you could say I always kind of feel, how can I say this, hollow at this time of year, even lonely a little bit, one might say. Yeah, it kind of makes me feel left out, invisible in a way, not wanted, not part of the community. Someone just simply peeping in on the culture. And I tell you what, it definitely makes me feel a little bit phony. I say that because, after all these years, I really should know everything there is to know about Vietnamese culture, right? So what is Tet? Well, you may have heard the word before if you're a history buff. In that case, you will have heard of the 1968 Tet Offensive during the war, one of the largest military campaigns of the time against US and Southern forces. It was a campaign of surprise attacks on military and civilian command and control centres throughout what was then South Vietnam, including here in what was officially known then as Saigon. And as the name implies, the offensive took place at Tet. Now, Tet's official name is Tet Nguyên Đán, and it's the most important celebration of the year in Vietnam, which is celebrated over 3 days, although there's usually a week's worth of public holidays on either side of it. And if you live here, you've probably noticed that a few days before those public holidays, the streets begin to get a bit quieter. Lunchtime naps seem to get just that little bit longer, and some people don't seem to even bother to show up for work at all, as if they've already checked out and said, fuck it, near enough is good enough, I'm done for the year. And if you need a little bit more context, Tet is similar in the way the West celebrates Christmas and New Year, or how Aussies like me celebrate our national holiday. Meanwhile, in other parts of Asia, it's known as Lunar New Year, or Chinese New Year. Tet marks the arrival of spring, which happens around this time of year every year, and this year it happens to fall on January 29 with, as I said, a week of public holidays, which start on the 25th and continue until the 2nd of February, during which time, if you're here, you can get right up close to things. So you can experience those iconic, long-held Tet traditions that you've heard all about, and that the Vietnamese are particularly proud of. It's also a time when you can witness one of the world's largest migrations of people as they evacuate cities and towns the length and breadth of the country en masse in order to return to their hometowns to celebrate with family and friends. Now, what you've got to remember is that cities like Ho Chi Minh attract tens of thousands, who knows, it could be millions of itinerant workers every year who come here in search of opportunities for a better life for them and their families back home. So, as you can probably imagine, that is the only time of year when these workers, the backbone of the nation, finally get the chance to return home to see their loved ones, which all sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? Getting time off work to spend precious moments with the people who mean the most to you. In fact, it can mean the opposite. This can be one of the reasons why many Vietnamese people actually dislike Tet, especially those who live and work here in Ho Chi Minh City, for example. Those people who are obligated to return to their hometowns far away, which sometimes can take days on public transport. You and I would probably just say, fuck it, and not bother, and hit the pub if it was open. But not the Vietnamese. Their commitment to family means they will at least get back to their hometown before hitting the pub. But all jokes aside, this duty to family places significant pressure on people to arrive back home bearing gifts, cash, and stories of success for expectant family members who have been left behind all year, thousands of kilometres away, keeping the home fires burning. And if that's not anxiety-inducing enough, leading up to the official holiday, airports are packed, air ticket prices become outrageously high, and the highways become clogged with punters in a hurry to get home. There's just no way you can win. In fact, some friends of mine over the years have told me they dread this time of year for one reason or another. For young ladies, it might be because their parents put pressure on them to get married and to have kids when they're not ready to. And for young men, it might simply be that their parents don't think they earn enough money. Neo Bangla Noi Vietnam, hey Jotoi biết trong comment section, Neo du nay dum voi bang. So what's all the fuss about Tet then? Well, it's steeped in tradition, isn't it? Remember I mentioned earlier that the Vietnamese return to their hometowns to catch up with family to celebrate? Well, that's not the full story. It's also a time for families to remember those who are no longer with them. You see, ancestor worship is a pretty big deal in Vietnam, and it's a way for the living to pay their respects to family members who have already passed away. It's a kind of reminder to those still living of their familial roots and to show gratitude for, I guess, just being here and still being alive and having hope for the future, no matter how much of a pain in the ass debt might be for them. In a culture where Confucian values collectivism and filial piety, that is, respect for parents, elders and ancestors, runs deep, this time of year makes for an interesting opportunity for someone like me, a cultureless, selfish and lazy bum from the West who values individualism over everything else, to gain insight into what makes this country tick. For example, back in their hometowns, it's customary for people to hit the markets before Tet to stock up on food, as most shops often close. They also go on cleaning benders, like what we might call spring cleaning, before it's considered bad luck on the first 3 days of Tet to clean the house. It's something about sweeping any good fortune you may have out onto the streets. And they also visit temples and pagodas to give offerings to deities and to pray for health and prosperity in the coming year. All pretty normal sorts of things for a culture that is highly superstitious. But probably the most unusual tradition I've learned about while researching for this video is the tradition of Som Dat, which, long story short, follows that the first visitor to the house on the first day of Tet must be someone considered to be lucky, of good morality and good temperament. Basically, it means don't let any unlucky bastards into your house, which is a good policy for any time of the year, I would have thought. But that isn't all beer and backgammon like many YouTubers would have you believe. That can actually be quite dangerous. I've already touched on how far people often have to go in order to get back home, which means most of them have to hit the roads and highways in a country that already has a far from impeccable traffic safety record at other times of the year, let alone on the biggest public holiday. So take the amount of traffic accidents as an example. Back in 2023, 89 people were killed in 152 traffic accidents over the holiday period. And just last year, 214 people were killed, and there were close to 10,000 cases where people needed medical treatment due to accidents across the first 4 days of the holiday period. And fireworks, typically associated with special public holidays like this all over Asia, can potentially pose some risk to your safety as well, after a 2020 decree relaxed the rules on fireworks and firecrackers, which had been in place since 1994, allowing individuals over the age of 18, including businesses, to set off fireworks. However, the fine print does say that only non-explosive fireworks can be used, nothing that explodes. So yeah, that's about the extent of my knowledge of Tet. gathered from over 15 years of living here in Vietnam. I really don't know what to think about that, except that I kind of feel like a bit of a failure. But having said that, perhaps the reason why I've never been invited to someone's house to celebrate Tet is in the detail of what I've already said. Perhaps it's a time of year that is just for Vietnamese families to celebrate, and therefore shouldn't be something I should get butthurt over because no one has ever invited me. But in its defence, Vietnam as a nation has been voted many times over as one of the friendliest and most welcoming countries in the world. So it can't be the case that Vietnamese people aren't friendly and welcoming. Plus, I already know that. That's something I have actually learned. So that's it then. It's either that Tet is just for families to celebrate, or I'm considered by my friends to be an unlucky bastard who they can't afford to welcome into their homes in fear of having a shitty year ahead. Okay, I'll see you in the next one. I've got to go and make a few phone calls.